Thank you very much again for joining us on OY Media Scotland. Apologies, we had to run this session for today from another location. So please do bear with us. As we usually have, we have Alagba Femi Odedeyi from the Yoruba Referendum Committee, and he will be talking to us today about the topic which we started about almost about a month ago, looking at things that are happening, and of course, in the lead up to the 29th of May 2023, which is the swearing date for the president-elect of Nigeria in the person of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I've got Alagba Femi Odedeyi with me on the program today. You are welcome on the program, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we thank God for seeing us through this day, and who will also see us through May 29. And I pray that nothing will happen against the inauguration of the incoming president, and we will be glad and we will rejoice on that day. Thank you for having me.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. I think I'm going to start the program right from the prayer you have mentioned now, because, for instance, the General Overseer of RCCG, that is in the person of Pastor Adeboye, actually mentioned something about that God will help Tinubu to rule Nigeria. And some people have taken offense in that, to say that, I mean, why would he say God will help him? And people are asking that, okay, if God doesn't help him, who actually are you expecting to help him to govern the country? Just like the Bible also says that we should pray for kings so that we can live a life that is peaceful. But also on the backdrop of that, the next person is actually Pabode George, who initially said he was going to relocate from Nigeria to Togo if Bola Ahmed Tinubu wins the election. But coming from him of recent, there was a report in the Tribune where he said, although he did not support Tinubu, but he will be praying for him. So do you see that as a shift in all what he has said up until the 25th of February 2023?
Well, there are two questions in one. So yes. That is for Bode George and then the General Overseer of Redeemed Church, Pastor Adeboye. So I'll take the one on Bode George first. I think there's also a report, I think yesterday or today, that said that he still intends to leave Nigeria, even if the tribunal validates his election. So I think he's just playing politics with all this, leaving Nigeria, praying for him and all that. You know, when he said he would pray for him, that was when, after the members of the, I think leaders of thought visited him. Some of the members of the Lagos Governance Advisory Council, led by Papa Tajuddin Olusi, visited him to talk with him, and then he said he will pray. But after that, he said he still intends to leave the country. So, okay, if he wants to leave the country, it's okay. There's no problem with that. I mean, he's free to live anywhere he wants to. But the problem is when he wants to substitute his own intentions for the interest of the generality of the people. So once he cannot agree to the consequences of the electoral choices that he made, then anything he does is his own problem. And we should let him do anything he wants to. If he wants to pray for Tinubu, fine. No. Everybody prays for something, one thing or the other. That doesn't mean they are praying to the God that we know. That is one. So electoral choices have consequences. They took their chances, made their electoral choices, and they are facing the consequences. So we should allow them to. Now, on the part of Pastor Adeboye, it is very interesting. I mean, like you said, the Bible says we should pray for the peace of the society, pray for our leaders and all that. So as long as Tinubu is the leader, even when he was not the president-elect, he was a leader in his own right in Yoruba and national affairs and even West African affairs. So it is proper for him. But the problem is that people are surprised because what I would call the Christian establishment prior to the election, they had this thing about what they call Muslim ticket, and they were, miffed that Tinubu went for such a ticket and then the ticket won, and so they have to throw every spanner in the works to, again, we say elections have consequences. So even if the entire redeemed body of Christ, I mean, one of their top leaders is Pastor Yemi Osinbajo, who also contested the election and lost at the primaries. So they may be angry about that and all that, but that is the consequences of their choice. Now, the problem is when the Tinubu group made their Muslim ticket, what they call the Muslim ticket, they had a calculation in mind. 1, political reality. 2, electoral reality. And 3, the contest for power within the Nigerian political firmament. And this has been consistent since 1959. So in order to break the jinx, let me call it the jinx of the Yoruba, then Tinubu went for that ticket. But you see, when Obasanjo, yeah, I can't hear. Can you hear me?
Continue, sir. I'm hearing you now.
So when Obasanjo was imposed on us, we didn't vote for him. The rest of the country voted for him, and he went there with his what they call balanced ticket, Muslim Christian. So, but what was the advantage? That not only the entire Nigeria, but even the West, what was the advantage did it bring to us? So that alone shows that the question is not about the ticket, but what we, the people, bring to the table. Contestation for power is about interest, which can be negotiated or forced or agreed upon.
Yes.
So the question now is, what are the Christians bringing to the table? Because when they limited it to the Muslim ticket, it appeared that they were just saying if Tinubu had the Christian as a vice president, then everything will be in order. But the question is, we've had Obasanjo as a Yoruba man, even if we didn't nominate him, and a Muslim as his vice president. And the guy that we voted for, Chief Olufalaye, had a Muslim vice president.
Right.
So the question is, if the issues of Nigeria had not been resolved by previous ticket balancing, what they call ticket balancing, the question today should not be about the balancing of the ticket, but what we, as not only Christians, but the peoples of Nigeria, what are we bringing to the table to negotiate? Because the politicians came to negotiate their own getting into power. Vote for me, I will do this, I will do that, I will do that. And we have been doing that since 1999. So at this point, the challenge should be on the Christians. What are they bringing onto the table? There is a political crisis in Nigeria, which no one can deny. And it has to do with permutations and contestations for power. That is why the question of ticketing becomes an issue. Because we say the North is holding on to power, and we don't want the North to hold power. The power must shift to the South. And when the power shifted to the South, we are not even taking the fullest advantage of it. So the question the Christians should be asking is, why is it that Nigeria is divided into the North and South with the advantage going to the North? Nobody is talking about that. The whole thing was set up by the British colonial rulers who, number one, made sure that the northern landmass is greater than the south and gave power to the north. And number two, to ensure that the Yoruba in particular were not able to get into central power. So they connived or forced Zik, that is the east, to align with the north to ensure perpetual dominance in Nigeria. But in the process, the West, through the action group, made sure that the minorities in the north and the south were also recognized. And the agitation for those minorities was captured in the Willings Commission, which the British set up to address the question of minorities. And the minorities mostly, especially in the north, that we now call North Central, which we used to call the Middle Belt in those days, which is now North Central, have a mixture of Christians and Muslims and other religious formations. And what they were demanding at that time was that all the minorities in the north and in the south must have their own regions so that they will be able to address their own issues. But the whole idea was killed by the north and the east at that time, to make sure that it is only the West that was divided up, with the creation of the Midwest and all that. So what I expect the Christians to be doing today is to revisit that commission or the report of that commission and its impact on Nigeria's political development, instead of talking about Muslim ticket, Muslim this and that, simply because we have had balanced tickets all along, and there's nothing to be proud of. And then you cannot then say that, okay, if we had balanced tickets before, we don't, what we need, the politicians will say, they will calculate it and say, it doesn't matter, Muslim ticket, they have the numbers, they have the others. But the Christians are still saying, let us go back to the old way. That is not the way to address whatever problems we think we have. We have to look critically at the historical development. What roles have we played in it, and what can we do today? So when Pastor Adeboye said that God will help him and all that, yeah, it is fine as far as some of us are concerned. Some are not happy with it, but he, as a person and as a pastor, he can make his own proclamation. The one thing that I'm glad he didn't say is that he didn't say he spoke to God yesterday and God told him to do this, because that is what has pervaded Christendom throughout this electoral season. Everybody will say they spoke to God yesterday.
Everybody is hearing God.
Everybody is hearing God every day, and God is telling them different things. So they have already tried to profane the name of God in the process. Yeah. So I'm glad Pastor Adeboye didn't go that route. He made his own submission, and we are glad that he did, because that shows a humility of the spirit. And that also shows that our understanding of the knowledge of God is also different. I mean, he could have said, God spoke with me this morning, and this is what he said. Yes. But he didn't go that route. So I wish some of the other Christian leaders will emulate that. Let people know the level of your understanding of the political process. Now, you can now pray to God to help for the achievement of whatever it is that you want to. But let us separate our lack or our surfeit of understanding from just dabbling and then making God the culprit and then profaning the name of God in the process.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I mean, you've spoken about the 2023 elections. I think right from the start, when some people were saying that it may not go ahead, it may be cancelled. And over time, I mean, you were not a pastor prophesying, but probably you look at the circumstances of things. And on and on, we've had it, and this is where we are, waiting or moving closer to the 29th. From the Electoral Tribunal, is very clear that that case will not be concluded before the 29th. As it was also being reported that at the last sitting, Peter Obi and Labour Party actually asked for 7 weeks to present their witnesses. So that means whatever is going to happen is going to be after the inauguration. But still yet, we had some couple of things happening at the fringes as we move ahead. One of such is a video that has been circulated of the person considered to be IPOB spokesperson or spokesman that is in Finland, that is Simon Ekpa, actually giving the Igbo people a sort of a direction. He said they are not no longer part of the country, that from 29th, they are going to sack all the military and police and stuff that are within the southeast. That's those five states in the eastern part of Nigeria. I just want to ask whether the way, although when we had the Sunday Igbo movement, let's call it like that, movement for a Yoruba nation now, because of what they perceived as the injustices of the Nigerian government. We had quite a number of Yoruba leaders and elders, even some of the Obas were calling them to caution. Have you seen a similar narrative from the southeastern part of Nigeria regarding IPOB pronouncements?
No. Well, part of the no is that, one, you have someone like Soludo, that's the governor of Anambra State, on the platform of ABGA, who initially came out against all this kind of politicking and all that, and then he was bullied and all that. He promised to come up with the second part of his letter, which he didn't do, probably to placate all those that were attacking him. But the way I read the whole scenario is this, and we have to go back into history to really understand it. And the history is this. Earlier on I mentioned the fact that when Nigeria was amalgamated, as it were, when it came into being, yes, they had the north with the large landmass, and then they divided the south into two, the east and the west, essentially. And then they prevailed. Some will say they blackmailed Nnamdi Azikiwe to collaborate with the north to ensure that the Yoruba does not rise in Nigeria's political firmament. And we have seen this operating every time, every electoral cycle since 1959. It's always an alliance between the north and the east to suppress the Yoruba. Now, why is that important? If you look at the north, before formal amalgamation and all that, we had the Fulani Jihad that was pressing downwards and also pressing eastwards in the north. They were checkmated by the Kanuri. So the Fulani jihadists were not able to take over the Borno Empire, that is the Kanuri Empire. Mm-hmm. So there was a stalemate. So Northern region became a sort of an alliance between the Fulani and the Kanuri. And then they were, with the Middle Belt as their foot soldiers. So they were able to create a governing apparatus for Northern region based on that alliance, the Kanuri and the Fulani. So that was why you have the first governor of Northern Nigeria, who was a Kanuri. His name? I've forgotten his name now. But, a Kanuri, and then Ahmadu Bello, the Fulani, became the prime minister. And that system was working until, the Abacha period, and now the, Buhari period and all that. And if you remember, Shehu Yadua, who was the obvious leader of the Fulani section in the north, and the Abubakar Kingibe, Abubakar Atiku and Kingibe, who were his major lieutenants at that time from the Borno side, although Abubakar Atiku is Fulani, but from that Borno angle. And you even recall that Bashir Tofa, who was the MP's, what's the name of their party now? NRC.
NRC, yeah.
Candidate against Abiola at that time was a Kanuri who was born in Kano. So you can see that mix in the north. So they were able to work it out in such a manner that the Fulani and Kanuri, what I would call detente, they managed to mix their leadership of the northern region. But in the south, it was not the case, because you had the Igbo and the Yoruba were not fighting each other at that time, because the Yoruba were fighting the Fulani incursion. And of course, the Igbo, they were just scattered all over the place. But the moment British colonial rule came into focus, the Igbo now thought, that is the East, that whether by blackmail or not, that the alliance with the North will allow them to control the West, and which was what has been happening since 1959. But the detente between the Fulani and the Kanuri in the North did not happen in the South. That is, the East and the West did not arrive at any equilibrium. It was a disequilibrium. And, that was when Azikiwe said that the gods of Africa has mandated the Igbo to, bring the rest of Africa out of the barbarism of the ages. Yeah. That was when they started talking about Lagos is no man's land, that it's only a matter of time before the Igbo take over Nigeria and all that. So the stalemate that was achieved between the Kanuri and the Fulani was not achieved in the South, between the East and the West, because the East simply went all out to try and take over the West. That was why they started by saying that they won the election in 1951, which was a lie by Azikiwe and Chinua Achebe, promoted by Chinua Achebe. Then, of course, we know what happened in 1959 and all that. So, in the South, that stalemate did not exist. And, of course, the West, because of our historical and cultural existence, we were not suppressed by the East. So, the only way they can do that, the East could have achieved its aim, is by taking over the federal government, that is the central government. And that was what happened in 1966, when they had their initial military coup in January. Yes. And then they started jubilating all over the place, and all that. And then they abolished the regions. And previously, it was the East that was against the federal system at independence, calling us tribalists and all that, when Awolowo was talking about federalism. Even the North, Ahmadu Bello was talking about federalism, of course, provided by they are in control of it. So it was only the East that was opposed to it. So when they had the coup in January, that gave them the opportunity to abolish all the regions and all the rest. And then we know what happened by the time the North recovered itself and the coup. So by the time Gowon came on board and the war started, Then they broke up the regions into states. They started with the 12 states, but with the same centralized architecture of states that they had. So they saw it as an opportunity. And at that time, all the civil service, all the areas where they thought they had an advantage, they posted all their people, Igbo people, into all the whole place, and they were in control. So after the war and everything that happened in the war, and even during the war, when they said they were leaving Nigeria, it was Lagos they wanted to capture. And I don't see the logic in saying you want to leave a country by capturing the capital city of that country. That means you want to take over that country, which was what would have happened. So having failed in that, the whole question of recalibrating their efforts, and then they cemented the Northeast Alliance by 1979, 1983, up till the present. So what they are doing now is part of that historical excursion. They know it cannot be achieved by military means again. That is a closed chapter. So what they are looking for is the political means. And that is why the question you asked, that's the background answer to the question you asked, that every one of them simply jumped on the bandwagon of Peter Obi during the election, regardless of any moral or political imperative. All they saw was one of them campaigning for the presidency. And then, of course, they try to use the religious divide as one of their campaign tools and all that. So none of them, even when the IPOB people were talking about sit at home and all that in the East and all that, they all kept quiet. And then we have seen what their leading people have said since the period of the elections. None of them, intellectuals, academics, businessmen, writers, and everybody, they were all in one page. How to take over Nigeria. That was their aim. Now, of course, it has to be through political means. And the only political avenue that is available to them is the Labour Party. So that was why they all jumped, regardless of the illogic and the fallacious nature of whatever they stand to gain. That was why Professor Shoyinka called them nurturing nitwits, and then they try to force, and that is where the fascism comes in, to force their views on the rest of the country. Fascism depends on getting the masses of the people whipped up sentimentally and emotionally towards arriving at an objective. And that was what they have turned the Labour Party into. So now that they have probably seen the handwriting on the wall, that even the cases at the tribunal, I will be very surprised if the case is not summarily dismissed. That is, there are cases at the tribunal, if they are not summarily dismissed by the tribunals. So, but that's my personal opinion. But you see, when they are now doing all this, it's also a multi-pronged strategy that they will continue to harass the incoming government. Then IPOB will be doing what it knows best, that everyone knows them for. All this sit at home, everybody come to the East, they will protect them. How can they protect anyone in the East when they are killing their own people in the East at this moment? With their...
I mean, that's the worrying part of it. Yeah. Even when some people say that maybe they are freedom fighters, but the freedom fighters, you fight the person that is oppressing you, and not like, I mean, attacking your own people and killing your own people in the name of freedom fighting.
Yes. So unknown government, Eastern Security Network, and all the rest. So that's what they are doing. So now, that's why I said it's a multi-pronged approach. that now they will allow IPOB to be making all the noise. They will be doing it while their Ohanaeze president, Iwaya, who is talking about, we Yoruba people are rascals and all the rest of it. While they are intellectual, it was Olisa Agbakoba who initially said that the cases must be determined before the inauguration of an incoming president. Now he's reversing himself and talking something differently. So you find that it's a multi-pronged strategy from all angles, hoping to overwhelm the rest of us into accepting them as leaders. But the major problem they have is that, like I said, the Hausa, the Fulani, and the Kanuri ended up in a stalemate, so they had to negotiate. Now, while the Yoruba are willing, a lot of Yoruba misguided, talking about Labour Party as if Labour Party is something to write home about, in terms of its meaning as a Labour Party,
Right.
You find them supporting Obi and all the rest and all the rest. The core Eastern leadership are not even interested in any form of alliance with the Yoruba. Otherwise, Peter Obi should not ordinarily have contested the election on the basis of the Labour Party. Once they have agreed, did not agree that the presidency should come to the South, and we have a formidable candidate in the South, in the West. All they should have done is to support that and then make it an overwhelming defeat for the Northern hegemony. But they didn't do that. Just like when Awolowo pleaded with Zik in 1959 to form an alliance, and then Zik simply rubbished the alliance and went with the North. So when this one now starts talking about people leaving this and this and this and that, number one, I'm certain not many of them will even take it seriously, because they know that they have militarily lost after the war, and there's no way a Biafra enclave in Nigeria can sustain itself with antagonist forces surrounding her. It's not possible. So the only thing they can do is to use that as a diversion, so that we will be battling with that while whether it's strategized or it's tacticalized to take over, because Lagos is their prime target. How to take over Lagos. That is their prime target since 1939. So it's not so when while Igboho was doing his own thing, and you have our leaders cautioning him, opposing him, telling him, this is not the way to go, all that. In the East, even before now, before Simon Ekpa's recent statement, you don't find them condemning the violence and the killings in the Eastern region. Rather, they were all in one accord behind their former leader, Kanu, and now with Ekpa, saying that, yes, he must be released, he must be that, he must be that. So everything concerning that aspect of the Igbo, what I would call the Igbo agenda, is aimed at browbeating the rest of us into accepting them, which is an impossibility. It's not going to happen. So it is better they recalibrate themselves. They should be able to review their role in history, not in terms of getting appointment or not getting appointment, but in terms of the historical evolution of the Nigerian state. What have they done and where have they lapsed? Then it is only then that they can be at peace with themselves. Because if they are not at peace with themselves, if their entire political aspiration is based on a lie, which is what it is, they cannot achieve peace. And nobody is going to fall for their lies because they are obvious lies. And that was what happened in the Lagos election, when the governorship election, when
Yes, in Lagos, yes.
in Lagos. So when every Yoruba say, what is this? You want to do? No, everybody just woke up as if, they were in a slumber, especially the Christian Yoruba in Lagos at that time.
Yes.
They woke up. So you cannot build something on nothing. So they don't need the rest of us in Nigeria to tell them what to do. They know what they did. All they need to do is to revisit their historical records and make amends by themselves. Otherwise, when they talk of marginalization and this, it is the reality they bring on themselves that has led to that marginalization. So if Zik had agreed with Awo in 1959 to form an alliance, there would have been a formidable southern leadership that can challenge and confront the Fulani Kanuri hegemony. So, but they destroyed it, and the consequences is what they are doing today. And that shows that we in the West, we have the capacity to form alliances with anyone that we choose, even if only for the survival of our region. Because that is what the name of the game is today. That the survival of our
survival, yes, definitely.
Is primary. It's primary. And we should not so if they want to, let them revisit themselves and their consciousness, starting from their intellectuals. If they can't do that, then it will be a continuous endless war for everybody. I mean, for them, not for us, because we know we are clear as to where we are going.
Right. Thank you very much for that extensive analysis of what is happening in the Southeast, especially regarding community and elders in calling people to order. Let's just shift on and move on to the inauguration itself. That's set for the 29th of May 2023, which is just about in few days' time. So preparations are in top gear. Would you think that at this stage where we are, there should be a bit of a caution when it comes to security issues?
Caution in what sense?
That would be caution in maybe looking at this sort of protest we have, looking at some people calling on the military to take over, and some, in fact, there is some FCT residents that also are claiming that, yes, they didn't vote and their vote should obviously have more value than the rest of us, and all these other threats. Yeah. So, and of course, we've just spoken about the Simon Ekpa that their people should come back home. It's exactly on that 29th that they're going to leave Nigeria and then sack all the security establishment that are in the Southeast. So do you see any sort of, what do we call it, anything happening?
Well, I don't see anything happening before May 29. I don't see anything happening on May 29. Now, when I say I don't see anything happening, I'm not like the prophets who say God told them. This is based on an understanding of what is on ground. An understanding of what is on ground. Now, those who are calling on the military to take over and all that, is part of political ignorance. Ignorance. Because number one, the military that will take over is not an Igbo military, even if the military takes over. So there's no way a military government will be beneficial to them. So the only reason they are calling for military takeover is to try to truncate
So this, yeah.
Nasiwaju presidency. That's the only reason. So those who are calling for interim government, they have kept quiet now for a while. We don't
Sure,
know what
definitely.
they are doing. An interim government will not even satisfy the Igbo or anybody because, number one, either a military coup or an interim government, a force must be behind it. As long as, if Simon Ekpa has the necessary force to drive away the
Yes.
Nigerian military in the east and all that, he can then impose any kind of order that he wants. I'm using it as an example. If
Yes.
Sunday Igboho has a similar force behind him, he can then overwhelm the Nigerian state and then decree, just like Shekau or whoever Boko Haram tried to do in the.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
the minimum is that when you make such a demand, you must have the capacity to bring it out. But if you make such a demand without that capacity and you expect someone else to come and carry it out and then hand over the baton to you, that is simply living in a fool's paradise. So that's why I said everything they are doing is simply because they don't want Tinubu as president.
President.
And why don't they want Tinubu as president? Tinubu is a Yoruba man. Whether he's a Yoruba candidate or not is immaterial. But he is the one that the Yoruba voted for at this point.
Yes.
So it's like they are cutting their noses to spite their faces. So when they embark on this, that's why I said, the security, if there's going to be a military coup, all these advocacies will only be used as justifications. They will not form the core of whichever force that carries out the military coup. So that means the military people that does that kind of thing will have their own agenda. So when they now come with their own agenda, everybody will now be back to square one. And so what do we do about the military? And that is the danger, or let me say the primary fault line with all these advocacies. You contested an election. Of course, everyone wanted to win. Everyone that contests an election will tell you that he or she is going to win. That's even if it is very obvious that he cannot win, they will still tell you they are going to win. So, because their preferred candidate lost, then everything must be thrown to the dogs.
It must be thrown out.
But you see, that is not how a state operates. When I say state, I don't mean the 36 states. So I mean the apparatus of government. Yes, the apparatus of government that runs a country. So that is why when they do the swearing in and all that, they present instruments of power, instruments of office to whoever is going to take over. So that instrument represents the power of the Nigerian state. So if there is going to be a military coup or a change, you have to take possession of that instrument of power, because that is what gives you the authority to activate certain elements in the state apparatus. So if you take over the government today and you take over the government, you now have the capacity. Who are those that will be controlling the army, the finance sectors, and all the rest, all the apparatus? So you have the command of that thing. Those who are objecting to you will have to create their own command structure away from, and then it becomes a conflict of the state. That is why if you study the various coups that has happened in Nigeria, you will discover that certain commanders in military formations are always targeted to take over certain commands in those formations. And then some of the politicians that actively control such environment, without which they will not. That's why the last person that they will take over from will be the head of state, because by that time, the head of state has already lost control of all those indices of power. So when they appear before the head of state, it will be you resign or you die. But if they had gone straight for the head of state, that means there are residues of power that can resist. So that will create its own conflict. So all these things play out. So when they were making their demands and they want a military coup, they want this, it's even an insult on the intelligence of the rest of us in Nigeria, especially those who fought against the Abacha military and all the rest, that some people in the 21st century will now, out of frustration, will now go about asking for, and in fact, where if to say that the military actors, they will be the first victims. It happened in Ghana. We talked about Rawlings, J.J. Rawlings, all this and all the rest of them. When he had this military coup, he was arrested and detained, and then his fellow soldiers freed him from jail, and then carried out a second coup, and he became the first victims of the second coup were those people who made him escape from jail. The first victims that he pounced on once he got power were those people. Mainly 4 of them, actually. And they were, some of them ran away from the country. So when they make these kind of asinine demands, they will just become the first victims, because whoever is going to take over control is not acting under your own impetus. He will just use you as an example. On the interim government, I read a report, I think earlier this morning. One of the major proponents of the interim government was Chief Afe Babalola.
Chief Afe Babalola, yes.
So he's now saying he's advising incoming President Asiwaju Tinubu. I mean, when you have spent all your intellectual energy to try to deny that reality, now you are now saying he should do this, he should do that. So that's what we are saying, that lack of political understanding and lack of knowledge about the contestation for power is what is driving these different people. So in terms of security, I don't see anything untoward happening.
Any surprises?
Any surprises. I don't see anything happening on the 29th. Like I said, even if they are gathering somewhere, God said they are gathering for themselves, not for him. So the handover will take place. And for me and for some of us, the question is not even the handing over.
Yes.
The question is which way for Nigeria? Because the Yoruba have been consistent since the anti-colonial rule that what we want is a federal structure.
Yeah. We will come to that.
Okay.
We will come to that part as the last part to talk about what needed to be done or what people should be doing after Asiwaju has been sworn in.
Yes.
The follow-on from the one that we're discussing, we're shifting it now to the United States position. Because right from the start or towards the election or after the elections, while the former U.S. ambassador in Nigeria seems to be okay with what happened, so to say, we had other officials, they were talking about the election being marred, some areas where there are violence, some areas where they believe that people interfered with the votes. And this happened almost everywhere, including, United States is an example as well during the last elections. Yeah. And even to the point that they claim to now have identified some individuals, and they go, either they've placed ban on them already, visa ban, or they're going to. place that ban, and some people have raised concern about that what sort of investigation did United States carried out to have come to a conclusion that so individual was involved in activities. But putting that aside, they seems to be on the other side up until the end of this week. In fact, some Peter Obi's followers, they call them obedient, some call them obedient and whatever other name, believe that the United States will stop the inauguration. But by the end of, that will be by the end of last week, since we're starting another week from today, there was a report of the Secretary of State calling Ahmed, the president-elect, and of course talking about U.S. willing to have a partnership, or to continue that partnership with Nigeria. I think it came as a shock to some of them, including Peter Obi himself, and also Abubakar Atiku, who came second in the last election. So, can I ask you then that why do you think the United States shifted its position from the earlier positions that seems to suggest that they are not in support of the election of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu?
I don't think the United States shifted its position. Okay, they have it. They are just like other countries. They have their diplomatic representation. In the diplomatic representation, they have people they call political secretaries, chargé d'affaires, economic secretary, defense attaches, and all the rest of it. The essential work of these people is to gather political information, what is on ground, do their own analysis, send it to their foreign ministry, which is called the State Department in the US, where they have desks, Africa desk, Nigeria desk, all these desks. They will also do their own analysis, and then whatever it is that they arrive at will be presented to their bosses, and then, they will follow the process of announcing it. So I want to believe that initially, when after the elections had been conducted and all that, maybe we saw, I think, the American ambassador or something like that visiting Tinubu and all the rest of it and all that. So they have their own information. And of course, we cannot tell them when to react, how they will react, or what they should react to. That will be based on their understanding of the reality on ground and the information in their possession. So that was why, for some of us, even before the telephone call from the Secretary of State, we've had, I think, Britain, South Africa, the African Commonwealth observer mission by, is it Thabo Mbeki or somebody? All the rest of them, they have commented and agreed that the election was free and fair, and they abide by the decisions. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. So based on all those things, it doesn't take rocket science to understand how America or any other country will behave. Now, the question is whether it pays America to create a confusion in Nigeria or to sustain its stability. Again, it doesn't take rocket science to know that they will sustain the stability. And why did I say so? America is building the largest consulate in the world in Lagos.
Yes.
That alone shows that it shows two things. One, if there's going to be any crisis in Nigeria, the South will be defended by the US. Two, it doesn't pay the US to create a crisis in Nigeria or to support a crisis in Nigeria. Otherwise, they will not be building the largest consulate in Lagos. So unless we had the situation like the Obasanjo did in, is it 2007, when he said the elections will be do or die or something like that. When the election itself, there was a crisis in the election itself, then they can all come together and say, no, we are doing this, we are not doing that, we are not. But that's not the case. What the case was at this point was that the losers are bent on scuttling the election for one reason or the other, which has nothing to do with the legitimacy of the election itself. That was why Peter Obi said he's not questioning the results, he's questioning the processes, whatever that means, as if there's a Manichaean difference between the two. So all those things, when taken together, will show that how America will respond is not rocket science. So when Adamachi, or whatever her name was, went to write a open letter to Biden asking him not to do this, not to do that, they will just laugh at such a letter. Why? They have their own information. And their information is not even rocket science again. Like I said, they have sources that they collect information from. They have, even if they don't use people, they use technology. They have satellite, this and that and all that. So it is obvious that America will not support the scuttling. And why will they not do that? Even if there's a crisis in Nigeria and then they scuttle the election, of course, they don't expect those who voted for Tinubu to just say, okay, you have scuttled it, and let life go on. There will be crisis. And who will bear the brunt of the crisis? The United States. Why? Because everybody will now be on the neck of the United States as, the democratic superpower to do the needful like they did in the Nadeko era. So with China staking its claim on Africa, with Russia staking its claim on Africa, with ISIS and ISWAP staking its own claim in the Sahel, and France running away, you think America will now say, yeah, let everything scatter? No, do that. So that's why I said those who are making all these claims and stuff are running on a wild emotion. It's an emotional roller coaster that they are getting to. And like I said, if they happen to scuttle it by one reason or the other, well, they can say that they don't want Nigeria, so that if they scuttle it, Nigeria will break up. No, Nigeria is not going to break up on that scuttling. What will happen is that those who want to break up Nigeria will suffer the consequences if such a scuttling takes place. That is the reality, and that is what they have to face. So it is also a lack of understanding of international politics to expect the United States to just come and say, yeah, we don't like the election, so vote, we take another election, or we don't support this. It is simply lack of understanding and lack of knowledge of, in the first instance, if you are really sure of what you are objecting to, maybe you have gone to court. So Go ahead
Yes.
and then let the court decide whichever way it wants to decide. Present your evidence if you have the evidence, and so it has nothing to do with even America itself. So if you are convinced that, I mean, when Awolowo challenged Shagari, I don't think they went to Britain or UK to come and support them. You present what you have, and then you do what you want to do, and then go your own way. Because even if there is a change in government, if there is a scuttling of the arrangement and there is no crisis, they will still have to relate. America will still have to relate with that incoming government. I mean, all the world powers will have to relate with that incoming government. So it really has nothing to do with what the US thinks or it doesn't think. It has to do with the kind of forces you have on ground and the kind of cases, that is the justification for what you are doing, that you have on ground. So again, I will use the Bible again, that my people perish because of lack of knowledge.
Because of lack of knowledge.
So in this case, the lack of knowledge of political power relations in the world is their own problem. That is, those so-called obedience or whatever they call themselves, Peter Obi and his own, they lack the knowledge of international power relations. And it is them, that is their supporters, the whole people, that will suffer the consequences of that lack of knowledge. And if they like, let them hear. If they like, let them continue on their self-destructive pattern.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. We want to appreciate you once again for coming right on. For those that will either be watching this later or those that are just joining us, I've been on with Alagba Femi Odedeyi, and the topic we'll be treating is ahead of May 29, 2023, and that is for Nigeria presidency. We'll go into the last segment of the program for today, and we'll specifically be talking about what next for us after the inauguration. Remember that Alagba Femi Odedeyi has always said that the inauguration is just like the starting point, that there are responsibilities that we as the people should take. I'll bring him right back on again, and we'll take this last segment. You are welcome back, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you've always mentioned this, that Bola Ahmed Tinubu's presidency is not an end, but a means to an end. So that means that him being sworn in is just the start of the work. Now, is that a work for him or a work for us?
Both.
Right.
Both. And I will explain why I meant both. Whether he projects himself as a Yoruba candidate or not, he's Yoruba, and the Southwest, we voted for him. So that was what I was alluding to earlier on, that the West, that is the Yoruba, right from the anti-colonial days, have been agitating for a true federal system for Nigeria. That was what propelled the action group, and that was what propelled the change in the constitution at that time from a unitary to a federal system, the Littleton Constitution, and under which the regional parliaments and regional governments were made. So it's been a consistent battle. Even taking Yoruba history into consideration, when the Kiriji War, they said is the longest civil war in history. So what was the basis of the Kiriji War? After the setting up of Ibadan as a city, a war camp from the refugees from the broken down Oyo Empire, and the Fulani were coming to the west, and then the Ibadan people the warriors got themselves together to confront them, and they confronted them all the way to Osogbo and all that and defeated them. And in the process, Ibadan became a military power over the Yoruba in those areas. So they also started sending their own representatives, which they call ajeles, to the different parts of Yoruba land to represent that power. And then those in the Ekiti and the Jesha area started feeling the heat of these ajeles and then mobilized against them and fought against them and all that. So that's why they called it the Ekiti Parapo at that time. So the battle, because the Ekiti people were insisting, Ekiti Jesha area were insisting on what can be called the federal system at that time. That is, the Yoruba, they should maintain their kingdoms and fiefdoms under a generalized regional structure, as it were. It wasn't a region at that time. But Ibadan wanted to impose its own supremacy by making Ibadan the center of all activities for Yoruba people. So it was essentially a fight between federalism and unitarism, even at that point, even though it was not clearly spelled out, but it reflected that tendency. And aside from Oyo Empire, we also had different kingdoms in Yoruba land at that time that were not subservient to the Alaafin of Oyo. So all through our historical existence, you find elements of federalism in place. And eventually that was what partially led to the action group. Because before the formation of the action group, they had the Egbe Oduduwa, and one of their major decisions was that they wanted a federal state for Nigeria. That was in 1945. So a president coming from Yoruba land and voted for by people. We didn't vote for Obasanjo, we all know that. So no one expected him to even, in fact, he won his second term by destroying what we call the Yoruba legacy. That's another story for another time, which made, they gave Tinubu one sobriquet, the last man standing, because he resisted Obasanjo. So now that we have a Yoruba candidate that was voted for by largely, essentially Yoruba people also, with other parts of the country, he has no choice but to situate himself within that federalist paradigm. Of course, he can become president and say, look, you can forget about that. We want this central system to work. We will do this, we will do that. He can do that. But I mean, one expects that from his experience in ADECO, anti-military rule and all the rest of that, he must be conscious of the federalist nature of Nigeria. That is one. I mean, the federalist quest. Number two, the elections have also thrown up the necessity for federalism, the way it went out. Otherwise, all the Muslim ticket, the Lagos experience and all that will not have materialized. But that is an eye-opener that the question of Nigeria's federalism is foundational, is necessary, and he cannot turn his back against that. So it's not a question of, okay, what permutations are we going to use in 2027? If I have a big example to lay, I've done this, I've done that, they will vote for me again and stuff like that. So that is that. So number three, from his own experience as Lagos State Governor, I mentioned it earlier that he was called the last man standing. It was based on his federalist opposition to Obasanjo's unitarism that allowed him to earn that respect, because he was the only AD governor that did not succumb to Obasanjo's blitzkrieg at that time, when most of the AD were led by Papa Adebanjo at that time to succumb to Obasanjo, and they lost all the 5 states except Lagos State. And even then, the current Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo, who was the Attorney General of Lagos at that time, took on the federalist battle with the central government all the way to the Supreme Court, in a legalistic manner and all that. And so they did all those things. So he has this background that made me to conclude that he has no choice but to flow with that federalist quest and actually make Nigeria the example for other places in Africa to follow, as federalism being the form of state that is necessary for a neo-colonial, multilingual, multicultural entity as we have in Nigeria. So that is on his own side. Now, on our own side, why I said both is that while those attributes might be recognized, we'll be shirking our own responsibility if we just say, okay, since we are there, now go and do it. Because it is not a question of just signing an executive order. Okay, as from tomorrow, Nigeria becomes, and then you sign. No. Again, it's a contestation for power. Those who are advocating for a presidency or for this or for that, and even when the northern governors supported the idea of power shift to the south, that is in the APCO, that that the power must come to the south, is a recognition. Excuse me. Excuse me. So it's a recognition of the balance of power and the balance of forces in the country. So when the North, that has been ruling for so many years, suddenly now turns around and says, let's power shift to the South, they have recognized the importance of balancing that forces, that we can't be sitting on this thing forever. It will backfire on us. So let us shift it to the South and all that. So they shifted it to the South. But we have also seen that central to Nigeria's problem is the question of federalism itself. That was why every regime since 1999 will come out and say, oh yeah, let us do something about Nigeria's structure. Yes, so in 2005, Obasanjo had his own conference, or whatever it is he called it. Yar'Adua had his own. Jonathan had his own conference. Yes. And even Buhari, the party set up some committee under El-Rufai on true federalism. And so if you look at all those things, they were just jamborees and nothing came out of them. So now, Tinubu might also say, okay, but I'm better than all the previous presidents, so I will set up my own committee also. Now, earlier on, I mentioned something about state power, not just, the administrative states we have. That is the control of the levels of power of the Nigerian state. That control, that state power, determines the direction of which Nigeria should go. So if you have a president that is not in sync with those levels of power, levels of power, defense, economy, and all that, and all the rest of it, he will either become a lame duck, like Jonathan did, or be removed from office one way or the other. Maybe by the next election, they will manipulate everything and then go. Okay. So, and that was why when they had all these conferences since 2005, nothing came out of them, because the central forces, some people will say owners of Nigeria. I don't subscribe to that nomenclature. I refer to it as the states, the apparatus of states in the economy, defense, and all that. It is not for nothing, just an aside, it is not for nothing that Dangote will be the largest refinery. Is it in Africa or in the world, in Lagos and stuff like that? It's not because Dangote is a genius in financial engineering. It is because Nigeria is wedded into the vortex of the world global economy, and they found the right place to put such an edifice. And so you find all these things, and these are the kind of power they wield behind the scenes. So when they now talk about all these conferences and nothing came out of them, it is because the peoples that are concerned have no say in the outcome of those conferences. So when you organize a confab like what's his name did, and then that's Jonathan, and then they come up with all kinds of recommendations. Then when they submit the recommendations, the government will now set up another committee that will now look at it and issue what they call a white paper, that is a government decision on it, and then see what will be done about it. So by the time they pass it through their system, the National Security Agency, all these defense intelligence, all these kind of things, the bureaucracy, by the time they pass through all of them, some of them might see it as injurious to what the Nigerian state is supposed to be. And then they will either just throw it to the trash can, and then if they have a president that doesn't care, I leave them, they will do another thing. So to avoid that, to avoid another experience like that, the saying that the best definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So if we now say, okay, now that Tinubu is our man as the president, let us leave everything in his hands, we are just acting out the definition of insanity. So rather than acting it out, we are now saying it is the responsibility of the people to seize the moment by themselves, seize the moment, and when they seize the moment, create their own alternative that the government will now respond to. It is to the advantage of, let's say, since we are talking about Yoruba people now, it is to the advantage of Yoruba people that we have someone like us, that is someone who has an idea of what we believe in as president. And he knows, or he is supposed to know, how to navigate himself around and all that and all that. But if that is now backed by our own activities and our own actions, which does not depend on his running around the bureaucracy or running around the state power and all that, but on the legitimate demands of the people themselves, then chances are that we'll be able to make it work. And that is where we come in, that we recognize his own antecedents. We also recognize his own limitations.
Yes.
When he gets, that's why you find all this conflict about who will become Senate president and who will not become Senate president. You see, when the Northwest is saying they have more votes, so they should control those, so they know the power relations that are happening. That, and the North Central is saying, maybe we also contributed to the vote. Where are we in the whole scheme? So you find all those things playing out. And yes, compromises will be made. Some will feel bitter. Some will say, okay, next time when elections come, we are going to reverse it. And they will say, let it come first, then we'll fight it out. All those kind of things. But we cannot afford to play that game. So that when we put our demands on the table, even if the president does not like it, there is little or nothing that he can do about it. Now, the biggest task is his party is the dominant party in the West. And if any of such changes like we have advocated is going to take place, we have to relate with that dominant party in the West. I mean, if we say, like we have said, we have a bill for a referendum to be passed into law and the assembly to conduct a referendum. Number one, we cannot be championing Labour parties. Why?
Yes.
Aside from many other things, Labour Party doesn't even have a presence in the region. So it will be foolhardy for us to go and start saying Royal Labour Party, Labour parties. I mean, aside from other considerations. Number two, we cannot go to the PDP because the PDP is a minor. Actually, I think from it's only in Osun State that the PDP has a sizable representation. Even in Oyo State, where they had the PDP governor, they are not in the assembly. So, and then the PDP has shown by the way it went about the presidential election that it doesn't care about any power shift or anything like that. So it will be foolhardy again for us to say, oh yeah, let's promote PDP. So that leaves the APC. And so our contention and our engagement will have to be on the APC, in the ledger. Of course, the PDP has no choice because they are only one in the West. Okay, so now that he is the president, definitely he's also the leader of his party. If not in Nigeria, at least in the West. So our activities cannot simply be, we don't like the president, but we want you to do this thing. That means we are not dealing with the reality. So what form of engagement can we devise that will compel the APC in the Southwest to act on what we are doing and what we feel should be done? That is the main concern. That is the main challenge. And then in doing that, all sorts of consultations will have to come into play, both direct and indirect. Those who don't understand it, those who understand it, those who don't even think it will work, try it first before you condemn it, and all kinds of things like that. So the advantage we have, we can maximize that going by the man's history, political history, from Nadeko up till this time, going by the historical pursuit of the Yoruba since 1945 at least, going by the experience of the last elections that we have, to the point that all the opposition against the election simply don't want him there. Nothing more, nothing less.
That's it.
So when we devise our strategies and the tactics that we use, and taking all this into consideration, that will allow us to come up with a viable platform for engagement that we can also advance to other communities in Nigeria, because we have different peculiarities. As the APC is dominant in the West, it is not so dominant in the South, or even in the North. So each one, and then you have the minorities in the North who are also split and all that, and with various nationalities in contention, in the North. So each will have its own peculiarities that they have to bring to bear on what we are doing. But the thing is, we have settled that roadmap when we said all the previous activities by the various presidencies have not yielded any result, simply because the peoples concerned were not actively involved in what they were doing. So that was how we settled by the referendum, what we call the Yoruba Referendum, that let the Yoruba decide on the kind of Nigeria they want, which will be backed by the law of the land in the West. And that will be the basis for engaging the center and even the global community, and not to talk of the African community. So in both instances, to a large extent, I see when I say I see, I'm not talking about prophecy. I'm talking about an analysis, a kind of relationship that will either succeed based on mutual understanding or fail based on whichever is dominant. Either the president says we are just wasting our time, it's not going to do anything, blah, 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 blah. And then we say, okay, since the president has spoken, we are not going to do anything. Or we say, well, that is your own no. Even if you tell us to go and sit down, we are not going to sit down because, we are all in this together, whether we like it or not. Because after your 8 years, let's even assume everything works smoothly and you spend your 8 years, definitely you can't turn around and say, Yoruba no lutukon again. No. Another person probably
it's another these people that will say our local from the north
and stuff like that. That is one. Two, the major obstacle that we now face will be, we look at the future even from the present. Someone wrote that the future is in the present. If the future is in the present, then we look at post Tinubu for Yoruba land, even if not for Nigeria. That so far we've had Awolowo, and we know what happened. We had MKO, which was a potential, but which did not happen. And now we have Tinubu with the thing. So when we look at post Tinubu, then when you look at the political firmament in Yoruba land, you discover that it will be difficult to have a single, let me call it, political leader as we have in Tinubu today. If ever. So our strategy must be designed with that future in mind, that once the people have their legitimacy recognized, whoever becomes Yoruba leader in the future, we have no choice but to abide by such things. So it's also preparing the ground for addressing any potential leadership vacuum in Yoruba land. So if today you have people like Bode George and all the rest of them saying they will go on exile when Tinubu is there, if after Tinubu and you have those people coming back and saying, maybe we told you Tinubu is there, so I'm the next one, and then you start fighting each other again, and then and we have said, and that it is historically accurate, that, and it can be proven, there are records for that the Yoruba were to be suppressed as the third tier of Nigeria. That was the aim, the colonial aim, to suppress the Yoruba people, and in order for Nigeria to progress. So with all this, it is incumbent on us to now say what we are doing is not only for the present, it's also for the future, because the future is also in the present, so that we will have prevented any irrational quest for Yoruba leadership, for anything post Tinubu, because the power of the people is already legitimized and entrenched. So that is the trajectory. That is how we are looking at it. So it's a
two-way, double-edged action. Both from the president, and also from us. And I think that's quite very, very important, which you have been saying all this while.
Yes.
That we should not see the presidency of Ahmed Bola Tinubu as the end. There should be a means to an end. We should not stop the agitation for a people's referendum, because also that will also help him. Bearing in mind, like you've noted, that he's had a federalist approach, which we saw through his time in Haiti and AC. And of course, also, we know there are quite some number of people, even within Yoruba, that had issues with Tinubu for whatever reasons. But a good number also understood at the last election that what is at stake is more than Tinubu, is actually Yoruba interest that was at stake. And it was good that actions were taken in time to secure Lagos, and of course, Lagos, Yoruba land. Thank you so much for your time today, Alagba Femi Odedeyi. You will be talking on ahead of May 29, 2023. And we'll be back in about another 2 weeks. And we hoping by then, I mean, we will have had this swearing in, and we would also have had maybe the first set of actions by the president then. So I will give you maybe about 1 minute or 2 minutes for your roundup. Congratulate the Yoruba people because I intentionally leave this to the last, and then of course encouragement, especially for our youths, because there still seems to be a sort of internal conflict within our youths between their anger against police brutality and their response to political contestation, especially when it comes to balance and contestation for power. So over to you, sir.
That's a tough one, but it's again, it's also simple. Let me start from the youth, and then I will end up with the Tinubu thing. You see, unfortunately, most of our youths they are not interested. Let me put it that way. They are not interested in knowing the cause of an action or an event. They are only interested in the manifestation of a result. So when everybody is saying, oh, SARS and this and this and this and that, a little understanding will have allowed them to understand the source of SARS and why it is there and why it should be removed. And it is tied to everything we are talking about. And that starts from the definition of youth itself. In what they call advanced countries, US, UK, it's not that there are no youths. Let me use the United States as an example. But you don't find national figures of those countries talking about youth. In smaller communities, in counties or cities, they can say they are setting up programs for youth, this in the summer and all that. But the central point is that the whole question of youth is solved at the level of education, formal education. Because when you have a nice formal education, it absorbs, you start from the youth now, from the toddler, kindergarten, elementary, all the rest to the university. And when you have that, you are plugging the youth into the productive economy by definition. And that was what happened in the Western region. When they had this education, free education and all that, then they had technical vocational education, then they had the formal academic education, and then they had all these industries where they put all these people into and then to work and all that before the whole thing was destroyed in 1966. So when we talk about youth empowerment or youth this or youth that, and we fail to look at that educational process, we are just catching at straws. And that was what happened with the SARS generation and all the rest, because they were looking at, okay, and we are used, we are energetic, you should put us somewhere, we should do this, we are not going to accept that, we are not going to. SARS was a renaming of what they call the Nigerian Mobile Police Force. The mobile, which they call Kill and Go. Kill and Go was created to suppress the thief people in the middle belt by Ahmadu Bello. He went on a visit to Indonesia or Malaysia and saw that formation and said, okay, these thief people are worrying us in Nigeria. Let us set up something like that. That was the origin of Kill and Go, which now became transformed into SARS. So the police system, the educational system that they are fighting against was a factor of the aberration of the federalist structure we have in Nigeria. But they are not looking at it from that perspective. One, either because they don't know or they don't care. But they are just saying, maybe it happened in Tunisia, it happened in Egypt, we can drive them away, it happened in Sudan. Without even looking at the repercussions or the consequences of what happened in those countries. In Tunisia today, even the constitution that they have is worse than the one they fought against. Of course, Egypt, we know how the military manipulated the evidence to sustain it. And Sudan, we see what is happening in Sudan today. So the youth need to rediscover themselves. That's why I said the superficiality of what they are talking about is what is creating the problems for them. And that is why a lot of politicians or so-called leaders will go out and say, youth empowerment, let us create a fund for youth empowerment, let us create an entrepreneurship, blah, blah, blah. The churches will create youth empowerment programs. They will say, give them money to trade or to do something like that. So, but the question is, we've had this thing before. It's not rocket science again, that the question of youth is tied to the education, and the education is tied to the economy. That is basic. So when I say let us use US as an example, in most of the campuses, university campuses in America, you find youth wings of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party on campuses, and they will be operating as regular political parties, electing themselves and doing things and stuff like that. So it is easy for them, once they leave the campus, to plug themselves into any opportunity that exists within their party and within the states that their parties control, or even within the federal government, if they control the federal government. So you don't find them running around as quote-unquote youths with demand. Why? Because everything is already tied to that development, that education. So if the Nigerian, or let me say Yoruba youths, I will be even more prefer to talk about Yoruba youths, have an idea of what has gone on before, they will not be rushing into any fanciful thing. And you see, in Lagos, if not for the what I would call Yoruba national consciousness, you see, it's very simple. When they were having the elections, and this guy representing the Labour Party, who was a prominent figure in the SARS movement at that time, is talking about doing this and doing that in Lagos. And if you compare it with what the current government is doing in terms of, well, let's limit it to intellectual struggle and stuff like that, that it doesn't make any sense to destroy what is already on ground. So in a nutshell, the whole question of youth is tied to the educational process. And what is the problem with our education? The problem with our education is because of the dysfunctional nature of the federalist system that we are operating on. So I will say we can look into that at another time. And then for the incoming administration, like I said, if anyone gathers, they are gathering for themselves. They are not gathering because of the law. And we say God has already taken control. Nothing is going to happen to the Ashiwa in negative terms. He will get inaugurated. He will be sworn in as president, and he will play his part in the federalist struggle in refederalizing Nigeria.
Yeah.
He will play his part in refederalizing Nigeria. And that is our prayer for him, and that is our prayer to God, for him to play his part in refederalizing Nigeria.
Thank you
very much. Yes.
Right. Amen. Thank you very much, Alagba Femi Odedeyi. We'll catch up with you again in 2 weeks' time. Some of the questions that we should have dealt with today, we'll push it forward to that time. So we do appreciate your coming around and always being available for us whenever we call on you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, viewers, for staying on with us. We'll be right back here in another 2 weeks, a time in which we believe that many things will have been on as well. But until then, I remain yours, Samuel Oludare Jirokon, and I'll catch up with you then in 2 weeks' time. Please do stay safe.